The Sovereign broadcast played the same footage for 3 months. The royal flagship burning in the orbit of Proxima 9. Princess Genevieve was officially dead. The Empire mourned. The war was lost. Until a battered Earth freighter breached the capital's blockade, carrying a lone human scavenger and the dead princess, breathing. The official military reports filed by the High Command of the Sovereign Systems stated that the dreadnought Archangel was destroyed by a catastrophic warp core breach following a surprise ambush by separatist rebels. The date was formally etched into the Galactic Archives, the 12th of November, 2244. The loss of the Archangel meant the loss of Princess Genevieve Kensington, the sole heir to the sovereign throne. Her uncle, Duke Nathaniel, assumed the role of regent. State funerals were held, statues were commissioned, and the galaxy moved on, convinced that the brightest light of a generation had been extinguished in the cold vacuum of Sector 4. But official military reports rarely tell the truth, and space, for all its infinite emptiness, is terrible at keeping secrets. Enter Jonathan Jack Reynolds. Jack wasn't a knight in shining armor, nor was he a decorated pilot from a pristine academy. He was a Terran, a human from a muddy, overpopulated Earth, operating out of a retrofitted industrial salvage ship named the Tethered Ghost. Before the galaxy opened up, Jack had been a propulsion engineer for Lockheed Martin's Deep Space Division, later transitioning into a combat mechanic for the Earth Coalition Marines. He was intimately familiar with how things broke apart, which made him exceptionally good at picking the bones of dead ships. 3 months after the Archangel went down, Jack was drifting through the debris field of Proxima 9. It was a graveyard of twisted metal, frozen coolant, and pulverized hull plating. The Sovereign Navy had supposedly scoured the area for survivors and classified the sector as a restricted quarantine zone. But to a human scavenger with an overdue docking fee and a ship running on recycled fusion cores, a restricted zone was just another word for a gold mine. Proximity alert. The monotone voice of his ship's rudimentary AI chimed, a relic of late 21st century programming. Adjusting yaw, Jack muttered, his hands dancing across analog switches. Unlike the sleek, neuro-linked ships of the Sovereign elite, the Tethered Ghost relied on manual hydraulics and thick, ablative titanium armor. It was ugly, loud, and smelled perpetually of burning ozone and stale coffee, but it was virtually invisible to high-end thermal sensors. He steered his ship through the floating carcass of a frigate, scanning for intact power relays or unspent ammunition. As he swept his short-range sensors over a massive chunk of the Archangel's severed command module, a bizarre anomaly flashed on his console. It wasn't a standard SOS. It wasn't a distress beacon at all. It was a localized high-frequency jamming signal, restricted to a 10-meter radius. It was designed to block deep space scans, effectively making whatever was emitting the signal invisible to Sovereign search fleets. Jack frowned, wiping a smudge of grease from his jaw. Why would a piece of a destroyed ship be actively trying to hide from a rescue party? Curiosity, combined with the prospect of high-value contraband, got the better of him. He maneuvered the Ghost alongside the shattered hull, matching its slow, agonizing spin. Engaging the magnetic docking clamps, Jack grabbed his plasma cutter, sealed his pressurized suit, and cycled the airlock. The interior of the Archangel was a frozen tomb. Floating debris, data pads, shattered glass, and the rigid bodies of Sovereign officers drifted in the zero-gravity environment. Jack ignored the gruesome sights. He had seen enough death in the Earth Coalition wars to be numb to it. He followed the jamming signal down a collapsed access corridor, using his plasma cutter to slice through a heavily reinforced bulkhead door that had no business being in a standard maintenance shaft. When the heavy steel gave way, Jack stepped into a hidden, off-grid compartment. In the center of the small room, powered by an independent military-grade microreactor, sat a single cryogenic stasis pod. Jack wiped the frost from the reinforced glass of the pod. Inside, hooked up to a tangle of life support tubes and intravenous lines, was a young woman. She wore the scorched, blood-stained uniform of a Sovereign fleet commander. Her skin was pale, her breathing terrifyingly shallow, but the vitals monitor blinked with a faint, steady green light. Jack recognized her instantly. Every screen in the galaxy had plastered her face across the news networks for the past 90 days. It was Princess Genevieve. He stared at the readouts. The pod wasn't an escape vessel. It was a panic room. The logs indicated it had been sealed from the inside, mere minutes before the Archangel was torn apart. More disturbingly, the internal memory banks showed that the warship hadn't been destroyed by Separatist plasma fire. The damage signatures recorded just before the blackout matched the precise, focused ion torpedo strikes used exclusively by the Sovereign's own elite stealth fleet, the Wraiths. Genevieve hadn't been killed by the enemy. She had been assassinated by her own people, and whoever did it had sent ships to make sure the job was finished, which was exactly why her pod was broadcasting a jamming signal instead of a flare. Jack exhaled a long, heavy breath into his helmet. "Well, Reynolds," he muttered to himself, "you just had to go looking for scrap." He didn't have time to ponder the geopolitical ramifications. The microreactor powering her pod was in the red, mere hours away from failure. If he left her, she would suffocate in her sleep. If he took her, he was making himself an accessory to a galactic conspiracy. Jack gritted his teeth. Humanity hadn't survived a near-extinction event and clawed its way to the stars by leaving people to die in the dark. He disconnected the pod from the floor mounts, attached his suit's heavy-duty towing cables, and began the grueling process of hauling the most important woman in the galaxy back to his junk freighter. The revival process was brutal. Cryostasis hangovers felt like having your blood replaced with liquid nitrogen while being trampled by heavy cavalry. Genevieve woke up violently on the cold steel floor of the tethered ghost's tiny medical bay. She gasped for air, her lungs burning, and immediately convulsed, vomiting a stream of clear, cryogenic fluid. Her military training kicked in before her vision fully cleared. She scrambled backward, her back hitting a bulkhead, her eyes darting wildly around the unfamiliar, cramped environment. "Easy, Your Highness, unless you want a heart attack to finish what that warp core breach started." Genevieve's head snapped toward the voice. Sitting on a crate across the room was a human. He was wearing a grease-stained jumpsuit, sipping a steaming brown liquid from a dented metal mug. He didn't bow. He didn't even stand up. "Who are you?" she rasped, her voice raw. "Where is Admiral Prescott? Where is my fleet?" "I'm Jack. Your fleet is scattered across 3,000 square miles of Proxima's orbit, and your admiral is currently testing the limits of zero-gravity decomposition," Jack said, his tone blunt and completely devoid of royal deference. "You've been asleep for 3 months. To the rest of the universe, you're dead." Genevieve stared at him, the reality of his words crashing down on her. She remembered the ambush. She remembered the betrayal. The sudden alarms, the comms blackout, and the unmistakable silhouette of a sovereign wraith cruiser firing upon her bridge. Her uncle, Duke Nathaniel, had orchestrated a coup, and he had used the chaos of the Separatist War to mask it. "You're a Terran," she noted, her voice regaining a fraction of its aristocratic edge as she took in his rough features and the utilitarian, brutalist architecture of his ship. "A scavenger." "I prefer freelance asset relocation specialist, but yeah, I dig through trash," Jack replied, setting his mug down. "And right now, you are the most dangerous piece of contraband I've ever hauled." Your pod's memory banks told a very interesting story about friendly fire. Genevieve's eyes narrowed. "If you know who I am, and you know who attacked me, then you know the danger you are in. You need to take me to the Loyalist outpost on the Aegis Rim immediately. I can reward you with wealth your primitive mind couldn't comprehend." Jack chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "First of all, drop the superiority complex. My primitive ship is the only thing keeping you breathing. Second, we aren't going anywhere right now. Look." He tossed a battered datapad onto her lap. Genevieve picked it up, her eyes scanning the tactical display. A massive, sleek vessel had just dropped out of slipspace on the edge of the debris field. Its energy signature was heavily masked, but the aggressive, dagger-like profile was unmistakable. An Obsidian-class hunter-killer, Genevieve whispered, the blood draining from her already pale face, commanded by Captain Roderick. They're doing a final sweep of the wreckage, making sure no evidence survived. Yep, Jack said, standing up and cracking his knuckles. And my active sensor ping from dragging your pod out of the dark just lit us up like a Christmas tree on their passive scanners. They are inbound. Etta, 6 minute. Genevieve struggled to her feet, leaning heavily against the wall. We have to run. Engage your slipspace drive. Can't, Jack said calmly, walking toward the cockpit. My drive takes 10 minutes to spool up. They'd blow us out of the sky before we hit 20%. Then we fight. What are your ship's weapon capabilities? Do you have phase plasma batteries? Quantum shields? Jack dropped into the pilot's seat and began furiously flipping a series of heavy analog switches. The ship shuddered as internal lights clicked off, bathing the cabin in the red glow of emergency power. I have 2 mining lasers, a hull made of repurposed tank armor, and a cargo hold full of highly unstable, illegally salvaged munitions. Genevieve stared at him in sheer disbelief. You brought me onto a flying bomb? We are going to die. You sovereign elites rely too much on perfection, Jack smirked, his hands moving with practiced, rhythmic speed. Your targeting computers predict enemy movements based on logical flight paths and optimal thruster burns. You rely on algorithms. Humans, we rely on chaos. The proximity alarms began to scream. The Wraith cruiser was closing in, its targeting lasers locking onto the tethered Ghost. Brace for impact, Jack barked. Instead of routing power to the engines to run, Jack grabbed the manual override yoke and jammed the thrusters into reverse. The tethered Ghost plummeted backward, diving directly into the densest, most dangerous part of the Archangel's wreckage. Jagged shards of metal scraped against the ship's titanium hull, sounding like the shrieks of the damned. Are you insane? Genevieve screamed over the noise, strapped tightly into the co-pilot seat. Almost certainly, Jack replied. He navigated the chaotic debris field entirely by sight, weaving through the floating ruins. The Wraith cruiser followed, but its sleek aerodynamic design and AI-driven navigation struggled to maneuver through the unpredictable, tightly packed wreckage. They're charging main cannons, Genevieve warned, watching the sensor readouts. Let them, Jack muttered. He slammed the ship down hard against a massive, floating cylinder, the detached, unexploded fusion reactor of a destroyed sovereign cruiser. He engaged the magnetic clamps, locking the tiny salvage ship to the giant bomb. What are you doing? Giving them a ghost, Jack said. He quickly wired a detoker from his cargo bay into the reactor's primary ignition node. I'm venting our plasma reserves directly into this dead reactor to jumpstart it. It's going to cause a localized electromagnetic pulse and a thermal flare hotter than a sun. That will destroy us too, she cried. Only if we have shields up, Jack grinned. Shields catch energy. Solid titanium deflects it. We go completely cold. No power, no life support, just a metal box riding the shockwave. He slammed his hand onto a large, red mechanical lever. The tethered Ghost went instantly dark. Complete, suffocating silence fell over the cabin. A second later, the sky outside the viewport turned blinding, agonizing white. The jury-rigged reactor detonated. The Wraith cruiser, perfectly optimized with its energy shields raised to maximum, absorbed the full brunt of the electromagnetic flare. Its sensors fried, its AI targeting system scrambled, and its engines stalled in a massive system reboot. The shockwave hit the Ghost like a physical hammer. The ship spun wildly out of control, propelled out of the debris field at terrifying speeds, hidden entirely within the thermal bloom of the explosion. For 3 terrifying minutes, they tumbled in the dark. Then Jack manually cranked a secondary generator. The red emergency lights flickered back on. The The slip space drive indicator chimed a cheerful green. "Spool complete," Jack said, his breathing heavy. He punched the coordinates, and the stars stretched into long, white lines. They slipped out of the sector, leaving the crippled Wraith cruiser blind in the dark. Genevieve sat in the co-pilot seat, her hands trembling, staring at the Terran who had just outmaneuvered the deadliest ship in her empire using garbage and a suicide tactic. "You humans," she finally breathed, a mix of horror and profound respect in her voice, "are completely terrifying." Jack took a sip of his lukewarm coffee. "You haven't seen anything yet, Princess. Now, let's go get your throne back." The tethered ghost did not head for the glittering core of the sovereign empire, nor did it make a run for the heavily fortified Aegis Rim. Instead, Jack punched the slipspace coordinates for a place not found on any official star chart, an illegal, Earth-operated salvage haven known to the Terran diaspora as New Detroit. Hidden within the dense, electrically charged rings of a gas giant in the outer veil, the station was a chaotic amalgamation of tethered asteroids, decommissioned dreadnoughts, and neon-lit docking bays. Genevieve stood on the cramped bridge of the Ghost, watching the sprawling, ugly magnificence of the human station bleed into view. She was clad in an oversized, oil-stained Terran flight jacket Jack had given her to hide her royal uniform. "This is a pirate cove," Genevieve said, her aristocratic upbringing recoiling at the sight. "Duke Nathaniel's intelligence network will have spies everywhere. He has already framed you for my murder and put a 1 billion credit bounty on your ship. We are flying into a trap." "Your Highness, you need to understand something about humans," Jack said, expertly guiding the bulky ship through a treacherous maze of spinning space debris. "We don't trust authority, and we certainly don't trust sovereign credits. Out here, a 1 billion credit bounty just means the guy offering it is desperate. Besides, I need to call in some favors." They docked in a secluded bay reeking of ionized plasma and stale beer. Jack led her through the labyrinthine corridors of New Detroit, finally slipping into a secure, soundproofed engineering bay. Waiting inside were 3 individuals who looked just as rugged as Jack. "Princess, meet the crew," Jack gestured. Riley Hughes, former Earth Coalition tactician. Sarah Jenkins, the best slipspace navigator this side of the Orion Arm. And David Mitchell, who used to design bunker-busting munitions for Raytheon Lockheed before the Galaxy went corporate. Genevieve offered a curt nod, though her eyes betrayed her skepticism. 3 humans and a scavenger. "My uncle commands a fleet of 10,000 state-of-the-art warships, guided by the most advanced predictive AI in the universe. How exactly do you propose we take back my throne?" Riley Hughes stepped forward, leaning over a holographic projection table. He brought up a tactical map of Aegis Prime, the sovereign capital. "Your military relies on rigid doctrines, Princess. Your AI predicts enemy movements based on the assumption that the enemy will do the most logical, self-preserving thing. Have you ever heard of the OODA loop? It's an ancient Earth combat theory created by a fighter pilot named John Boyd. Observe, orient, decide, act. To win, you don't need a bigger army. You just need to move through that loop faster than your enemy, forcing them to react to chaos." "We aren't going to fight his fleet," Jack added, tossing a heavy metallic slug thrower onto the table. "We're going to bypass it." Genevieve frowned, looking at the holographic defenses. Aegis Prime is protected by a Type 4 planetary energy shield. Nothing gets through without an authorized, sovereign transponder code. Even if you manage to mask your approach, the moment you touch the atmosphere, the shields will vaporize you. "That's true for energy weapons and plasma drives," David Mitchell chimed in, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "Energy shields are designed to stop high-velocity, superheated threats. They react to thermal blooms and quantum signatures. But what about something cold? What about a massive, dumb piece of rock?" Genevieve's eyes widened as the realization hit her. Kinetic bombardment. "Exactly," Jack said. We've got a gutted, sovereign carrier tethered on the dark side of this asteroid. It's completely dead. No power, no engines, no life support. It's just a 10 million ton brick of titanium. We're going to load you, me, and a small strike team inside. Sarah is going to use a heavy tug to hurl that dead ship out of slip space directly at Aegis Prime. You're going to throw a dead dreadnought at my capital? Genevieve asked, the sheer audacity of the plan leaving her breathless. The planetary shields won't recognize it as a ship because it has no power signature. It'll just register as a rogue asteroid, Riley explained. The shield will try to deflect it, but the sheer kinetic mass will punch right through the barrier, causing a localized shield collapse. The dreadnought will crash into the artificial ocean outside the royal palace. It's a completely unguided, suicidal drop. The sovereign AI won't predict it, because no sane species would ever attempt it. And once we crash? Genevieve asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. We kick the doors open, walk into the High Council chamber, and let the galaxy see that the princess is very much alive, Jack said. Your uncle's authority rests on the lie that you died a martyr. The moment your people see you, his fleet fractures. We don't have to win the war. We just have to light the match. Genevieve looked at the faces of the Terrans. They were reckless, primitive, and completely insane. But as she looked at the map, she realized something profound. They were right. My uncle is hosting his coronation ceremony in 48 hours, Genevieve said, her voice turning cold and resolute. Let's go ruin his party. The drop was the most agonizing experience of Genevieve's life. Inside the hollowed-out belly of the dead sovereign carrier, there was no gravity, no light, and no life support beyond their pressurized environmental suits. Strapped into heavy-duty crash webbing alongside Jack and his Terran strike team, Genevieve could only listen to the terrifying groan of the hull as the ship plummeted toward Aegis Prime. Atmospheric entry in 10 seconds, Sarah Jenkins' voice crackled over the secure comms, broadcasting from the tug ship safely hidden light years away. Brace yourselves. This is going to hurt. The dead dreadnought slammed into the planetary shield of Aegis Prime. Because the ship possessed no active energy fields, the shield's sensors registered it as an anomalous meteor. The friction was monumental. Inside the dark cabin, the temperature spiked violently. The sheer kinetic force of the 10 million ton vessel tore a massive temporary hole in the planetary defense grid. Impact. The carrier struck the artificial ocean bordering the royal palace with the force of a tactical nuclear warhead. A colossal tsunami of displaced water washed over the pristine marble courtyards of the capital. Inside the hull, the shock absorbers screamed, snapping under the pressure. Genevieve was thrown violently against her restraints, her vision blurring into a haze of black and red. Up, everyone up, Jack's voice roared through her helmet comms. Genevieve blinked, fighting off the concussion. Jack was already unbuckling her, hoisting a heavy, Earth-made kinetic assault rifle. The team moved with terrifying practiced efficiency. Mitchell planted a ring of concentrated breaching charges against the carrier's outer hull. The explosives detonated, blowing a hole out into the sunlight. They stepped out onto the smoking, waterlogged wreckage of the ship. Less than a mile away, the towering spires of the royal palace loomed, currently in a state of absolute panic. Klaxons wailed across the city. Elite royal guards, clad in ceremonial obsidian armor, were swarming the shoreline, their plasma rifles drawn. "Drop your weapons and surrender!" A sovereign commander's voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "Now or never, princess," Jack said, stepping aside. Genevieve Kensington removed her helmet, letting her long hair fall loose. She stood at the edge of the shattered hull, the sunlight catching the intricate, unmistakable golden crest of the sovereign heir embroidered on her collar. She tapped a stolen officer's comlink, broadcasting her voice on an unencrypted, open planetary frequency. "This is Princess Genevieve Kensington, rightful heir to the sovereign systems," she spoke, her voice cutting through the panic like a blade. I am not a ghost. I was not killed by separatists. I was assassinated by Duke Nathaniel, who currently sits in my father's throne." Silence fell over the shoreline. The royal guards, men and women who had sworn their lives to her family, lowered their weapons in shock. "The shield breach has triggered an automatic lockdown," Jack warned, checking his wrist monitor. "Nathaniel knows we're here. He's deploying his personal Wraith squadron to the courtyard." Above them, 3 sleek, black Wraith cruisers dropped out of the clouds, their weapon bays opening. These were Nathaniel's fiercely loyal death squads. They didn't care about the true heir. They only cared about their paychecks. "We need cover," Riley yelled, raising his rifle. "Hold your fire," Genevieve ordered. She looked directly at the royal guards standing on the shoreline. "Soldiers of the Sovereign Empire, your regent is a traitor. Defend your empress." For a second, the universe held its breath. Then the commander of the royal guard raised his plasma rifle, aiming it not at the Terrans, but at the sky. "Protect the empress," the commander roared. Thousands of royal guards opened fire simultaneously. Anti-air plasma batteries, designed to protect the palace, pivoted and locked onto Nathaniel's Wraith cruisers. The sky erupted into a chaotic web of blue and green energy fire. The Wraith ships, caught entirely off guard by the sudden mutiny of the ground forces, were shredded in midair, crashing into the ocean in a spectacular display of fire and twisting metal. Genevieve didn't wait to watch them burn. Flanked by Jack and his human strike team, she marched off the wreckage and strode directly into the royal palace. The palace security, seeing their supposedly dead princess leading a squad of heavily armed Terrans, simply stepped aside, dropping to their knees in reverence. They reached the grand doors of the High Council chamber. Mitchell blew the locks, and the heavy golden doors swung open. Duke Nathaniel stood by the throne, his face ashen, surrounded by a dozen of his elite personal bodyguards. He stared at Genevieve as if looking at a phantom. "Kill her!" Nathaniel shrieked, his composure shattering. His guards raised their energy weapons, but the Terrans were faster. Humans didn't rely on the slow spool-up times of plasma coils. Jack drew a heavy, archaic weapon from his hip, a heavily modified Colt M2011, firing solid tungsten slugs. The crack of the gunfire was deafening in the ornate chamber. The kinetic rounds bypassed the guards' personal energy shields, which were designed to absorb heat, not blunt force velocity, dropping 3 of them instantly. Before the rest could return fire, the royal guards flooded into the chamber from behind, weapons leveled at Nathaniel's surviving men. The bodyguards, seeing the impossible odds, dropped their weapons and raised their hands. Genevieve walked slowly up the crystal steps toward her uncle. Nathaniel backed away, trembling, until his back hit the cold metal of the throne he had tried to steal. "Genevieve, please, it was the council. They pressured me." "Save it for the tribunal, uncle," she interrupted, her voice radiating absolute authority. She turned to face the council members, who were cowering in their seats. "The war with the separatists is a lie, orchestrated to consolidate power. As of this moment, I am assuming direct command of the sovereign fleet. Order a system-wide ceasefire." The chamber erupted into a flurry of panicked compliance. Genevieve turned back to Jack, who was casually ejecting a spent magazine from his pistol, looking entirely out of place amidst the gold and marble of the royal court. "You did it, Your Highness," Jack smirked. "Got your fancy chair back." "We did it, Jack," Genevieve corrected softly. She looked at the Terran, the scavenger who had pulled her from the dark, who had taught her that survival sometimes meant throwing away the rule book and embracing the chaos. "The Sovereign Empire owes a great debt to humanity today, and I intend to repay it." Jack chuckled, sliding his pistol back into its holster. "Well, you can start by waiving that docking fee I owe at Proxima 9, and maybe fill my ship with premium fuel. The tethered ghost is running on fumes." As the galactic news networks broadcasted the miraculous return of the Empress, the galaxy held its breath. The Sovereign Empire was forever changed. They had learned that while their machines were perfect, it was the messy, unpredictable, and fiercely loyal spirit of humanity that had saved them all. What an epic conclusion! From hiding in a frozen debris field to crashing a dead dreadnought directly into the capital, Jack and Genevieve proved that human ingenuity cannot be stopped. If you loved this HFY story of survival, strategy, and taking back the throne, hit that like button. Share it with your sci-fi loving friends, and subscribe for more incredible tales of humanity dominating the stars. See you next time.